We'll go to Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. I know it's a little bit going on out there, and I appreciate your time. Just a quick thing on the JCPOA that's been discussed. I think it is worth noting there are provisions of the JCPOA that would be expiring now had we stayed in it. And I think it's important when we talk about the future, in foreign policy time, like 10 years actually is pretty quick. And so I want to pivot a little to Ukraine from that perspective. First off, I want to say thank you to the administration for changing your tone. I think it's become clear over the next few weeks that the administration is clear-eyed about the seriousness of this threat. I was concerned with some of the wording early on, but it does appear as we've doubled down our commitment. I mean, it's very clear to me that Ukraine, and I think you've said this too, sir, Ukraine is fighting for all of us. We have to arm them because they are fighting for all of us. And I think it's important for people to remember, if Ukraine falls, and I think we're doing the right thing by stressing our commitment to NATO territory, and I actually really do believe that if Vladimir Putin moves in on NATO territory, he would be met with a devastating response. But I think it's important for people to remember, there's a lot of real estate still that's not in Ukraine, that's not part of NATO. And that's why it's important right now for us to make sure that Vladimir Putin can go no further. And I hope he loses some of his occupied territories. Just a couple of legitimate questions that I want to know the answer to, believe it or not. I want to ask first off about, a month ago it was reported that there might have been the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. I wondered if you had an update on that in terms of what we know.
Thank you. And some of this may be more appropriate to take on in a different setting, but having said that, this is something we're looking at very, very carefully. I don't believe that we've been able to verify that use, but I want to come back to you. There are different kinds of chemical agents that could be in play, including riot control agents that would be prohibited, that kind of thing. But in terms of the use of a chemical weapon, I think what I can say here is that we've not yet verified the use, but it's something that we're very, very much focused on.
Thank you. Next question is the use of, for American aid, to the extent we can answer this in this setting, what is the prohibition? What is the reason for not basically flying American aid directly into Ukraine versus through proxies? Is it an international law issue? Is it a safety issue? Is it infrastructure? I'm curious if you can answer that.
I think first the most important thing is the aid is getting in,
right.
Getting in record time. It used to be, for example, under presidential drawdowns, it would often be weeks between the time the president made a drawdown decision and the aid got into the hands of those who needed it. I was just there, as you know, including at the staging site for where some of this aid is getting in, and it's down to, in some cases, 72 hours. That's how rapidly it's getting in. So I don't think we have an issue right now with the assistance not only being provided, but actually getting to where it needs to get. Once it gets to the border and it's handed over to the Ukrainians, they're the ones, of course, who are getting it where it needs to go. They know this a lot better than we do, and they've been extremely effective in making sure that these supplies could get where it needs to get.
And let me ask you about the Air Force side of things. I believe one of the programs we used to do through the Air National Guard, I'm a member of the Air National Guard, we would pair with Ukrainian Air Force, we'd do fake fights, train each other, we'd train them to fly. Has there been any consideration to restoring those programs, bringing Ukrainian pilots potentially to American Air Force bases to learn to fly? Because, I mean, yes, it takes a long time to train a pilot, it does, because we're so good, but it takes a long time to train a pilot, but there's no time like now to start, so I wanted to ask you about that.
I agree with the general proposition, and indeed we are moving forward on training, because here's one of the challenges. Some of the systems that the Ukrainians would like to have that could be effective in repelling the Russian aggression and defending the country are systems that they're not trained on, and it does take some time. The Pentagon, and I think Secretary Austin referred to this the other day, is engaged in some training. So are other allies and partners in Europe. I can't address that specific program. The Pentagon would have to address that, but generically, yes, we're engaged in training.
And I'll just say to wrap up, I think, it takes a lot to change an army from Warsaw equipment basically to NATO equipment. I think with what we're seeing with our allies and donating some of the old Soviet equipment is actually helping to accelerate that process to switch over to NATO standards. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I'll yield back.
Thank you.